My name is Tim Hammond, and I'm here at the Conference on Men's Issues to discuss the findings from my global survey of circumcision harm. That was 30 years ago. There was a television talk show program in the States by a very intelligent critical thinker by the name of Phil Donahue. And he had a program on surgical foreskin restoration from a gentleman by the name of Richard Steiner. And he talked about how this improved his sex life. And with him was a nurse, Marilyn Milos, to talk about the effects of circumcision. And I, as a circumcised man, believed that everything was fine with me, but if I could make it feel better, why not? So at the end of the show, her number was put up on the screen. She lived in Marin County, California. I lived in San Francisco. I called her up and I said, "Tell me more." She put me in touch with another gentleman who was doing manual foreskin restoration, not surgical. And he and I got together. He showed me how to do it. We started a support group called the National Organization of Restoring Men. Men came out of the woodwork for moral and technical support on how to regain their genital integrity. And then shortly after that, as I began working with my own body, I became aware of this intense anger and frustration over why I had to do this, while at the same time, every 26 seconds, there was another baby boy being mutilated. And that's when I broke away and started another organization, a more activist organization, called No Harm. Yeah, my involvement in the gay movement started long before my interest in genital integrity and genital autonomy issues for children. As a young gay man, I came out very early, at age 17, and I became very aware at a young age about the influence of religion in oppressing my sexuality as a gay person and how it oppressed women's sexuality. And it just made sense to me that if I'm fighting for equal rights and fighting against oppression based on one's sexuality, that this other issue of genital autonomy fit hand in glove, because fundamentally genital cutting of children is an anti-sexual act. And so I saw that connection between the fight for liberation for LGBT people and the fight for children's rights to bodily integrity. When I came out as a gay man, I was raised in a Roman Catholic family, and I remember very distinctly my very Catholic uncle telling my single unwed mother, "You better get a father for that boy or he's going to turn out queer." And that haunted me for much of my younger life, believing that I was going to go to hell for being gay. And when I came out, I almost immediately hooked up with an organization called Dignity Integrity in my hometown of Rochester, New York. And Dignity Integrity was a special ministry to lesbian and gay Roman Catholics and Episcopalians, with the idea that you can reconcile your Christianity with your homosexuality, and that they were not mutually exclusive. And it was very much at that time a very justice-oriented liberation movement that came out of Vatican II and social liberation, and the concept that one could be both Christian and gay was a novel one for many of us, and we lobbied the Catholic Church to try to accept the fact that Catholic churches needed to be more open and affirming of LGBT people. And I was a little bit of a thorn in the side of most of the people in the congregation, because every Sunday when we would have a mass, we'd allow time for announcements. And I would get up And I could almost see people's eyes roll in the back of their heads because they knew that Tim was going to make some kind of political announcement or make a solicitation for money to help some kind of gay-related cause. And it seemed very important for me, though, that being my belief system at the time was that if you were going to be Christian, you needed to take action on your beliefs. Someone once told me that the purpose of Christianity was to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And in that vein, with people like Harvey Milk being my idol, my mentor, long distance, not personally, that I felt I owed it to the congregation to help them awaken to the ideas that, hey, there's some issue going on in Minnesota, that we have an obligation to support our brothers and sisters in their campaign in Minnesota, or there's something happening as a fundraiser for a documentary film about lesbian and gay issues, that we need to support that in order to raise awareness of issues that we care about. I was involved in a lot of different lesbian and gay organizations at the time, not just Dignity Integrity. I was a member of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. I was a paid member of Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, which basically took on legal cases involving LGBT folks. So I had a pretty well-rounded involvement in many different facets of the gay liberation movement, but at the same time I was also active in women's issues too, supporting things like the Equal Rights Amendment and National Organization of Women. I started to move away from LGBT issues and feminist-oriented issues when I began to see in the wider culture that these issues were pretty much handled. They were well on their way to becoming mainstream issues. And now, at age 60, I am now seeing the excesses of some of those movements, particularly that the feminist movement, as I see it today, I've learned. There was a special incident in my life in which I learned that there was a difference in feminists. There was not such a thing as a monolithic block called feminism, but that there were two basic types of feminism. There was equality feminists who believed in equality between the sexes, and then there were what I call victim feminists who basically just wanted special rights and privileges for themselves without regard to what effect it has on the other half of humanity. When I started to move away from feminism, there was a trigger event for me. I was involved by that time in what is now called Intactivism. At the time, we didn't have a name for it, but Alice Walker created a wonderful film called Warrior Marks about female genital mutilation, and it was being screened at the Castro Theater in San Francisco. And a bunch of us who were involved in the male genital mutilation issue showed up at the movie theater with leaflets to say, we stand in support of women because we are opposed to male genital mutilation as well. And everything went well outside the theater. We were leafleting. Everybody treated us well. We went in, we viewed the movie, and then they turned up the house lights for Q&A afterwards. And the moderator invited people from the audience to ask questions of Alice Walker. The very first person who stood up was a member of our group, and it was a man. And the very minute that the audience, which was 99.9% women, mostly lesbian, the minute they heard a male voice, they started stomping their feet and screaming and booing and hissing. And ultimately he acquiesced and he sat down. Then a couple of other people from the audience, all women, asked questions. They were allowed. They were given the politeness of asking their questions, and Alice Walker answered their questions. And then I stood up. And again, they heard another male voice.
It was like church.
Well, they stomped their feet and they booed and they hissed, but I stood my ground and I stood up. But I was shaking at that point because I had considered myself a feminist at that time. In fact, a lot of my lesbian friends considered me an honorary lesbian because I was in solidarity with a lot of their issues. But I stood up, and finally Alice Walker stood up and came to the microphone, and she tried to tell the crowd to quiet down, and she said, "Let the man ask his question." And my question was simple. I said, we're involved in the effort in North America to protect boys from genital mutilation. What advice can you give us based on your knowledge of what it's taken to try to eradicate female genital mutilation? And she very graciously offered the response, that it takes persistence and patience. I thanked her, but by that time the audience was still out of control. I moved out of the row and started walking up the aisle, and I literally had women spitting on me, yelling at me. They were saying, "You don't belong here." They were yelling things like they should have cut it all off. And I was shaken. I was totally appalled at the way I was being treated, because I considered these my sisters. And it was at that point that I realized that there are many facets to feminism, that it's not a monolithic block, and that many of the women in that audience felt that they were victims, and that all women are victims, and that there can be no such thing as a male victim of anything, much less mutilation. So that was an awakening for me. Well, I had long thought that in order to solve the problem of male genital mutilation, that we needed to wake up men to the issue, particularly circumcised men. Because just as in cultures that circumcise the girls and their brothers, their boys, these people are ignorant of what was done to them. They were brainwashed into thinking this was a benefit done for them and not to them. And I felt that a similar phenomenon was at work in North American culture, where most circumcised men were pretty ignorant. They viewed it as a benefit. They didn't remember the event because most times it was done in infancy. But I felt you had to wake people up, educate them about the functions and the benefits of the foreskin, the harm of circumcision, about their own rights to their own bodies, and so on and so forth. And that's been a struggle. It's been a struggle, but the only ones that I could see that really got it were men and women who were affiliated with the men's movement. Now, even many men, particularly circumcised men in the men's movement, were still unaware, but not to the degree as the wider society. So I really felt that it would be beneficial to bring this issue up at a conference like this. The best part of the conference for me was the young men. Now, actually, there's two best parts. The young men that found their voices early in life and are willing to stand their ground and talk about true equality between the sexes and not take second place. The other thing that has always been encouraging to me, particularly within the Intactivist movement, has been the presence of women, and women who get true equality, not privileges. To quote a sign that some Intactivists use, it states that bodily integrity is a human right, not a female privilege. And that encapsulates it for me, that what I saw here at the conference was women who were not afraid to speak out against the excesses of radical feminism and to speak out in favor of true equality between the sexes. I think those two things for me, the young men finding their voices and the women speaking in favor of true equality, were the best parts of the conference for me. The worst part of the conference for me, which I wasn't prepared for, was how depressing I have ended up this conference feeling. Because we're talking about genital mutilation, yes, that's my particular area of focus, and I always tangentially knew about other men's rights issues, but never to the depth and breadth that I was exposed to at this conference. And it's rather depressing to realize that, and this relates to the Intactivist cause, that not only are we fighting religion in terms of trying to protect boys, but we're also fighting an institutionalized ideology where women are controlling the dialogue, who have convinced people, including many men, that women are the only victims of anything. Rape, sexual assault, domestic violence, genital mutilation, you name it. And that's been kind of depressing to me, to realize that we have yet another obstacle in our way. But I still remain hopeful, particularly because of the influence of more women in this movement and the younger people involved as well. I see similarities between the men's movement now and where the gay movement was when I was a younger man. In both of those instances, it was almost subversive, because you were going against the mainstream. As a younger gay man, it wasn't cool to be gay the way it is allegedly today. It's the same thing with men's rights advocates today. It's not cool. It's frowned upon. It's derided. And we're just sort of in the beginning stages, although I know that men's rights have been going on for quite some time now. But we're also, I think, based on my limited knowledge of MRAs and the movement as a whole, that we're probably set to exponentially increase our chances of true equality between the sexes.